Late in 1940, the Ottoman Empire was brought into the fray as well, after Germany tricked Russia into thinking that Turkey had attacked it. As a result, much of the 1950s was dominated by Allied action against the Ottomans. First, Britain and France launched a failed attack on the Dardanelles. This campaign was followed by the British invasion of the Gallipoli Peninsula. Britain also launched a separate campaign against the Turks in Mesopotamia. Although the British had some success there, the Gallipoli campaign and the attacks on the Dardanelles resulted in British defeats. Trench warfare. The middle part of the war, 1916 and 1917, was dominated by trench warfare. Trench warfare began in 1914, but the war tactic didn't dominate the war until 1916. Both sides had built a series of trenches that went from the North Sea and through France and Belgium. Soldiers fought from digging positions, striking at each other with machine guns, heavy artillery and chemical weapons. The land between the two enemy trench lines was called no man's land. This land was sometimes covered with barbed wire, landmines and scared cats. The enemy trenches were generally around 50 to 250 yards apart. Those soldiers died by the millions in brutal conditions. Neither side had any meaningful success or gained any advantage from trench warfare. US enters, Russia exits. Despite the stalemate on both fronts in Europe, two important developments in the war happened in early April 1917, provoked by the German attacks. The US entered, despite popular opinion until the provocation, entered the war. The country was angered by attacks upon its ships in the Atlantic, declared war on Germany. Then in November, the Bolshevik Revolution ended. There was no more Tsar, no more alliances, the old government was gone, so there were no reasons to keep going to war. So Russia pulled out of the war. It wasn't doing very well in the war anyways. For example, the Battle of Tannenberg from 1914 saw the Russian 2nd Army routed by German 8th Army, a defeat from which they will never recover. German casualties at Tannenberg are 13,873. Russian casualties are 17,000. People died in that battle. Still, the kick of the war was the Battle of the Five Frontiers from August to September 1914, a series of 5 bloody battles in Lorraine, Ardennes and southern Belgium. These early exchanges saw the French Plan 17 and German Schlieffen Plan collide. The offensive was a spectacular failure for the French army with 300,000 casualties. The Battle of Marne from September 1914 initiated trench warfare. It brought an end to the first mobile phase of the war. After a communication breakdown, Helmut von Moltke, the younger army, dug in at the river Ast. At the Masurian Lakes, September 1914, Russian casualties numbered 125,000 to Germany's 40,000. It was the second catastrophically heavy defeat for the Russian forces. They were outnumbered 3-1 and routed as they tried to retreat. The Battle of Verdun lasted from February to December 1916. It was the longest battle of the war, lasting over 300 days. That battle put such a strain on French forces that the British were pushed to launch the Somme offensive. French infantrymen described the German artillery bombing with these words: "Men were squashed, cut in two, or divided top to bottom, blown into showers, bellies turned inside out." On the eve of the Battle of the Somme, cameraman Geoffrey Mellens visited the front lines, and you can find the footage he shot there on YouTube. It's too much for this video. The Gallipoli campaign lasted since April 1915 until January 1916. It was a huge, costly failure for the Allies. The landing of Anzac Cove. Anzac came from Australian New Zealand Army Corps Cove. It was a beach that they were supposed to land on and protect. 3,000 people died on that beach on the attempted landing. They finally landed there, but the campaign was finally a failure. 27,000 French troops became casualties and 150,000 British troops and the Minion ones became casualties. Battle of the Somme lasted from March to July 1918 and was the bloodiest battle of the war. Over 1 million soldiers died there, 460,000 soldiers from the British side, 200,000 from the French side, 100,000 from the German side. Britain was at first the biggest loser, losing in the first day 60,000 soldiers. The Spring Offensive started in March and lasted until July 1918. It saw German stormtroopers make huge advances into France. Having defeated Russia, Germany moved vast numbers of troops to the Western Front. However, this fast pace moving was too fast for the supply chain. They were conquering more than they could afford. Unfortunately for them, they could not keep up with the rate of advance. The 100 Days Offensive started in August, ended in November 1918. It was a rapid series of Allied victories. Beginning at the Battle of Amiens, the German forces were gradually expelled from France and then back past the Hindenburg Line. Widespread German surrender led to armistice in November of the same year. The War at Sea. The first naval battle at sea of World War I happened in August 1914. It was the Battle of Heligoland Bight. The British fleet ambushed and sunk 3 German light cruisers and 1 destroyer. This was one of the few victories of the British forces over the German forces on sea. Even though Britain had more destroyers, more cruisers, despite that they didn't have one thing the Germans had, the U-boats. In 1914, SM U-9 German U-boats sank 3 British armed cruisers in under an hour. U-boats were so effective that they tossed caution to the wind, and on May 7th, 1915, the cruise ship Lusitania was torpedoed by a German U-boat. 1,198 people were killed, including 128 Americans. The recklessness of German submarine warfare was a big influence on the United States' decision to join the Allies in 1917. The carnage at sea didn't end there. From 1916 to 1917, 1.5 million tons of Allied shipping was lost to German U-boats, and Germany didn't even have that many U-boats. Only 360 were constructed, of which 117 were lost. Not misplaced, lost in war. Still, around 50% of British merchant vessels were sunk by German U-boats. While the first military submarine, named the Turtle, was first used by the Continental Army during the American Revolution, submarines only made a large military impact during World War I when Germany launched its fleet of U-boats. Its submarines mostly stayed on the surface and submerged only to attack ships with torpedoes. Germany's indiscriminate submarine warfare was a primary reason that the US joined the war. The largest sea battle of the war was the Battle of Jutland. It lasted since 31 of May until the 1st of June 1916. It was the largest full-frontal naval battle of the war. 14 British ships were lost to 11 German ships. Britain lost almost twice as many sailors as Germany. Still, this victory wasn't big enough for Germany to make any difference. They would have needed a better win. The North Sea was heavily mined by both sides. Even though after a 1907 treaty they were not allowed to do that, they could only mine 3 miles of an enemy's coastline, but both sides ignored this rule. The success of German U-boats caused the disastrous Passchendaele offensive. A main reason why this campaign was launched was to capture the German U-boats based at Flanders. The attack failed, however, with Britain suffering massive casualties. Still devastatingly effective and winning the war was the Allied naval blockade of Germany that lasted since August 1914 and ended in January 1919. Germany was becoming more and more reliant on imports for food and bullets, and according to a study, in this blockade were lost almost 500,000 lives. In December 1914, the German Navy bombarded Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby. 18 civilians were killed, and as this poster suggests, the incident created outrage in Britain and was used for later propaganda, this being the other mistake of infuriating the public opinion and getting a country to declare war on you. Finally, there was an estimated 1,547 miles or 2,500 kilometers of trench lines dug during World War I. The trench network stretched approximately 25,000 miles or 40,000 kilometers from the English Channel to Switzerland, and the area was known as the Western Front. Casualties. The next section isn't as cheerful as, I don't know, nothing was really cheerful in this video, despite my cat joke. It's a really grim viewing or listening, but the war was grim. Total casualties caused directly by the war are estimated at 37.5 million. 7 million soldiers were maimed for life. Germany, of all countries, lost the most men. 2 million people were killed or missing. Almost 1 million British or British Empire soldiers died. On average, 230 soldiers perished for every hour of fighting. 80,000 British soldiers suffered shell shock, around 2% of the ones that went to war. Shell shock is a mental illness. It leaves you maimed for life. It's believed to be brought on by intense sustained artillery shelling. It cost the Allies $36,000 to kill an opposing serviceman, almost twice as expensive than it cost the Central Powers to kill a man. The highest casualty rate among any country was Australia's. 65% of soldiers died, and France lost the greatest percentage of population. 11% of France's entire population was killed or wounded. On the Western Front, total casualties were 3.5 million dead, almost 8 million wounded. Finally, the Allies lost over 2 million people and 5 million wounded. Central Powers 2.5 million, almost 3 million wounded. All these numbers weren't counting civilians. And that's all with the grim and sad second episode of World War I. In the next one, I'm gonna cover battlefield machinery, weaponry, tanks, planes, machine guns. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe, and until next time, beware of the falling apples.